Greetings, everybody. I am Dr. James Smith, and I am just wanting to share with you some information that I think is helpful for mental health. Um, we get into what I have come to call the ineffective coping cycle, and you can see this presented here on your screen. What I want to do over the next few minutes is just kind of go through each one, just kind of briefly touching on it. And then what we're going to do in different videos is we're going to go back and look at each one of these pieces, working our way back. So to begin with, life is going to life, right? Life events happen. And so that's really where we want to start, is with just the fact that life is going to life. Bad things are going to happen sometimes. Um, Life events and good things are going to happen sometime. A life event isn't necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It just is what it is. But it's a life event. And we have external and internal life events. And a way to think about that is that an internal life event is something that happens internally. An internal life event happens inside of my body. So, like for the last couple of days, I've been struggling with a cold. That would be an internal life event. It's something, it's affecting my mood, my energy level. Maybe I feel a little bit sore, or maybe I'm a little stuffy, or whatever it might be. But it's something that's happening inside of my body, right? And this can happen with our mood. It could be that we're tired, we're hungry. It could be that I'm feeling depressed or anxious. Panic attacks are internal events. There's something that happens inside of our body, right? So that's a life event. It's something that happens internally. An external life event is something that happens outside of my body. So if I were to walk out of my office today and the tire were flat on my car, that would be an external life event. Maybe one of my children gets sick, that would be an external life event to me, right? So maybe I get fired from my job, or maybe a relative, a loved one passes on. That would be an external life event, right? So, and I'm talking about these life events that are kind of associated with distress, but the fact is that life is going to life. Some things are not going to be distressful. Maybe I win $100 on a scratcher's ticket, right? Or maybe my kid comes home and they're just really excited because they aced this test that they were really worried about in school, right? So not all life events cause distress, right? But a life event is going to lead to an emotional response. So we have a life event, and the life event leads to an emotional response. That's going to happen. That's going to happen in life. There's no way to prevent that. Life events are going to happen, whether it's internal or external, and we're going to feel some way about that life event, right? Um, that and the important thing to remember about a life event and the emotional response is that while the life event is the catalyst for having an emotional response, the specific emotion that I'm feeling is dependent on not the life event itself, but on how I have interpreted the life event. And so, for an example, if maybe I bet my kid 20 bucks that they were going to flunk the exam. I don't know why I would do that, but I'm like, oh, you're going to do terrible on that. So I bet them $20. Maybe it's a reverse psychology motivation for them, right? And then they come home and they've aced this exam, right? But it's cost me $20. Now I'm like, oh crap, now I got to go to the bank, right? Ugh. And I'm going to feel that way, right? Because their acing the exam cost me $20, right? The way that we feel, the specific emotion that we feel, is based on how we interpret the things that happen in our lives. Life events are going to happen. We're going to feel something about it, but the specific feeling that I'm experiencing is not a direct consequence of the life event. The specific feeling is a direct consequence of how I have interpreted the life event. And we have all of these interpretive lenses, right? That we use. We have core beliefs about ourselves. Am I safe or am I vulnerable? Am I responsible? What level of responsibility? What level of control do I have over things? What is my value, right? My belief about my own self-efficacy, right? If I feel like I'm not able to do anything right and I walk out, so that's like this core belief that I have about myself, and I walk out of my job today and my tire is flat, I'm probably going to feel overwhelmed by that. Whereas if I have a core belief that, I'm capable of managing most situations in my life, I go out and my tire is flat, I might be like, well, shoot, right? But it's not going to be a big deal. It's just a flat tire, right? So the specific feeling that I'm experiencing is a consequence of how I've interpreted the life event. And part of my interpretive lens is kind of the core beliefs that I have about myself. That includes my strengths and my vulnerabilities. It includes my needs, right? It includes certain personality traits. It includes enduring qualities and transient states that we want to develop or that we're experiencing in the moment. And it includes like role expectations, So as a husband and father, an educator, a therapist, these are roles that I have, and these roles come with specific expectations, right? And so I'm assessing whether I'm meeting those expectations, and that's going to make me feel a certain way. So I have these emotional responses. We do this with all of our, now, I talk about this as a process, life event, interpretation, specific emotional response. That is a process that happens. It is a process that happens in millionths of a second. It is so fast that for any practical purpose, these things may as well be happening simultaneously, right? It's so fast. And that's why this part of the ineffective coping cycle is the arrow is black because it's going to happen. um, a life event's going to happen. We're going to interpret that life event, and then we're going to feel a certain way about the life event based on our interpretation of it, right? That is just going to happen. It's largely out of our control because it's beneath the level of our consciousness. Now, something we can do is we can actually go back and look at our interpretive lenses. So we can go back and look at our interpretive lenses. And we can start adjusting those interpretive lenses, but that's for later on. We're going to get there. What happens is then, after our emotional response, we will go into what we call assessing mindset. Assessing mindset is when we start judging what we're experiencing, right? And there's four big categories of assessing mindset. The first one is emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is when I use the way I feel about something as proof of what that thing is. And so I don't like raisins. Can't stand them. I know a lot of people love them. I think great for you. If you love them, that's awesome. Somebody needs to eat them because it ain't going to be me, right? Because I think they're gross, right? But by saying they are gross, I've just engaged in emotional reasoning because I've taken the way that I feel about raisins and I've made a statement about the raisins themselves. It is accurate to say I am disgusted by raisins. It is emotional reasoning to say raisins are disgusting. What I've just done is I've taken the way I feel about something and I've used that as proof of what the thing is. That's emotional reasoning. The second type is moral judgments about matters of preference. So an example of this would be I really like just plain vanilla ice cream, right? I like plain vanilla ice cream. Well, what happens is people will look at me and go, God, that's so boring, right? Ugh, it's just vanilla. What's so big about vanilla? Yuck, right? When somebody does that, they're engaging in emotional reasoning, right? But what they're doing is they're communicating to me that my preference for the type of ice cream that I like is wrong. And that's a moralistic judgment about things with no moral meaning. Moralistic judgments about matters of preference, matters of personal taste, matters of just personal judgment. I like this more than that. I like to do something this way, not that way, right? I like to cut the grass and then weed eat. Other people may want to weed eat their yard and then cut the grass, right? That's a matter of personal judgment and personal preference. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But people will do this often. They'll engage in moral judgments about matters that are just matters of preference, and they'll communicate that they believe something is wrong based on whether or not they like it, right? That's moralistic judgments about matters of preference, taste, things with no moral meaning. Another type of assessing mindset that we use are comparisons. Comparisons are one of the most fundamental and instinctive things that we do as human beings. It's also one of the most useless things that we do as human beings, most of the time, right? Now, if I'm cooking chicken, I want to make sure that chicken is done. So I'm going to compare cooked chicken to raw chicken for my safety's sake, right? That's why it's such an instinctive thing for us to compare, right? Is this chicken good for me to eat, right? Now that's important, right? When I start making comparisons between me and other people, that's completely useless. I have this problem, whatever problem. I walk out of work and my tire is flat, right? I have this problem. And then I think, well, this really isn't that big of a deal because, uh, there's people starving around the world and this is just a flat tire. And that might ease the distress I feel about having a flat tire, but it doesn't actually help me address the flat tire. It's useless. Comparing the fact that I have to deal with a flat tire to people starving in the world is useless. It does nothing. It doesn't help the people who are starving, and it doesn't help me get my flat tire fixed. Or I could compare it this way. Nobody else has their tire flat. Why me? Right? Why me? Why do I have to deal with this? That's a comparison term, right? And again, it's useless. What am I going to do? Flatten everybody else's tires so that life is fair, right? I have to deal with the fact that my tire is flat. And that's the bottom line. And comparing whether this problem, my tire being flat, is better or worse than other people's problems is a completely useless uh, useless waste of energy, right? The last one is unconscious standards. And this goes back to the idea of those roles in our interpretive lenses, right? We will often assess things based on standards that we haven't actually consciously developed or thought out in our lives. And so, like, am I being a good father? Well, what does that even mean? Am I being a good husband? What does that mean? Am I being a good therapist? What does that mean? Right? Am I being a good boyfriend, a good girlfriend, a good life partner, a good employee? Am I being a good customer at a grocery store? Or am I being a good patron at a restaurant? Right? We have these standards of how we expect ourselves and others to behave. Is this person being a good waitress, right? Is my checkout person at the grocery store being a good checkout person? We have these standards of people's behaviors that we apply, but have we ever really thought and brought to the level of our consciousness what those standards are? But we're going to assess people by them and we're going to assess ourselves by them, right? What happens when we enter into assessing mindset is we enter into this uh, period or this exercise of disempowering thoughts and uncomfortable feelings. And this is a whirlpool. This disempowering thoughts and uncomfortable feelings is just an absolute whirlpool that just sucks us down. And disempowering thoughts are exactly what it sounds like. They make us feel powerless. Disempowering thoughts just leave us feeling absolutely powerless. And so when we feel powerless, we're going to feel anxious or angry or sad, overwhelmed, right? Because we're framing our experience as us being powerless. And what happens is those uncomfortable feelings that we have that go along with us framing our experience as us being powerless, right? They're going to get worse. And when they get worse, they're going to increase those disempowering thoughts. And those disempowering thoughts are going to make us feel even worse, which means our thoughts are going to be even more disempowering. And we just get caught up in that whirlpool of disempowering thoughts and uncomfortable feelings until the point where we get to feel so bad that we have to do something about it. And then we'll engage in ineffective coping behaviors. So there's four big types of ineffective coping behaviors. There are numbing behaviors. Numbing, ineffective coping behaviors are things like drugs and alcohol. There are things like binge watching on television, gambling, anything that could become an addiction, gambling addiction, behavioral addictions, pornography addiction, sex addictions, spending money addictions, right? Those are all numbing behaviors. Another type of numbing behavior is self-harm. People will cut or burn themselves or hurt themselves in some other way. That is a numbing behavior. They're trying to numb whatever emotional pain they're experiencing through physical pain, right? And so those numbing behaviors that just try to just numb whatever emotional pain we're experiencing. Ruminating. Ruminating is a weird one. Ruminating is getting on a wheel and just not being able to get off of it. We just run and run and run on this wheel of thought, and we just never are able to come off of that wheel of thought. So that's ruminating, right? We just think about it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And ruminating is a weird one because it really doesn't make us feel better. It's weird. So we're gonna talk about these probably in the next video, right? Third type is avoidance. I'm gonna close my eyes and ears and la 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 la, pretend like the monster doesn't exist, right? I'm just gonna pretend. So we try to avoid the problem and just like it's not even there. And then the last ineffective coping behavior is actually aggression. And we're going to talk about the three big types of aggression. There's actual physical aggression, which is like actually assault, where we inflict harm, physical bodily harm on another person. But there's also physical intimidation, where maybe we're using some kind of physical act to try and intimidate another person. There is coercive aggression, which is pressure, 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 where we try to apply pressure to get the other person to do what we want them to do. And then there's manipulative aggression, which would include things like lying, being deceitful, maybe not even through commission, where we actually give false information, but through omission, where we just don't tell someone everything. We're only going to give them enough information for them to make the decision we want them to make, right? There's emotional manipulation, where we're trying to evoke feelings, maybe guilt or shame, out of someone to get them to fear. Maybe we're trying to evoke fear from someone in order to get them to do what we want. So emotional manipulation is aggressive. There's passive aggression, giving people the silent treatment, those kinds of things. So there's different types of aggression that we're going to talk about. And what happens when we engage in these ineffective coping behaviors? Here's the real kind of catch with ineffective coping behaviors is that they can look very much like effective coping behaviors, because ineffective coping behaviors are actually really good at squelching the pain and those disempowering thoughts that we feel, and that disempowering thoughts, uncomfortable feelings part of this cycle, right? They can be really good at that. The thing is that they don't ever really address the life event, my interpretation, or the emotional distress I feel that started this whole process in the first place. So one of the clear indicators that I'm engaging in an ineffective coping behavior is that it doesn't actually address what the real problem was. I never address what the real problem was. And then the second indicator that we're engaging in an ineffective coping behavior is that it's probably going to lead us into another life event, another distressful life event specifically, right? So I think about this comedian that I heard one time who was talking about how he would realize he didn't have any food in the refrigerator and he would freak out about that. So he'd go get high. And when he came down, he had sold his refrigerator, right? He had just made his problem worse, right? That's a sure sign that we're engaging in an ineffective coping behavior, is that the one, we're not addressing the problem that started us off on this cycle in the first place, but secondly, it's actually going to make things worse. It's going to lead us into a new cycle and around the wheel we go again, right? So that is the ineffective coping cycle. I wanted to share this with you. I wanted to offer these ideas with you. And over some videos coming up, we're going to explore each of these elements of the cycle individually and in more depth. So I hope these videos would be helpful to you. Please let me know in the comments below if there's anything that you feel like would be more helpful. I'm always open to suggestions. So be well, take care of yourselves, take care of one another.